Hello everyone, and welcome back. It's been about a month since my last upload, but trust me, I haven't been sitting around doing nothing. I've been working on something much bigger than last two videos. And today, it's finally ready. Ladies and gentlemen, the legendary Dell OptiPlex 790, the king of budget gaming. Let's send that idea straight into space, because honestly, YouTube is already flooded with videos about tiny budget gaming PCs, and in my opinion, most of them simply don't make much sense. The biggest problem is always the same: the power supply. You're limited before you even start upgrading, so instead of spending around £60 on a complete OptiPlex, I bought this. A Dell Precision Tower 5810. This particular machine was only missing one thing, the hard drive. But in return, it came with something much more interesting: a 685-watt, 80-plus gold power supply. And thanks to Dell's proprietary graphics power connector, it can deliver up to 225 watts directly to the graphics card. Add the 75 watts available from the PCI Express slot, and you've got roughly 300 watts available for your GPU. That's already enough power for a surprisingly capable gaming build. The workstation also comes with an Intel Xeon E5-1620 version 3. That's a 4-core, 8-thread processor running at 3.5 GHz with a boost clock of 3.9 GHz. I'll be honest, this isn't exactly a powerhouse anymore, and let's just say we'll be replacing it with something much more appropriate for a workstation and for gaming. Memory-wise, we've got two 4GB DDR4 modules for a total of 8 GB. Graphics duties are handled by the NVIDIA Quadro K620, and let's be honest, this isn't exactly a gaming graphics card, especially in 2026. The system also includes a DVD writer, which is actually perfect if you still enjoy installing games from physical discs. Yes, some of us still own those. Now that we've had a look inside and everything appears to be in good condition, let's see if this thing still works. Well, it boots, so it's time for the first upgrades. We'll replace the memory with 8 4GB DDR4 sticks, giving us a total of 32 GB, running in quad channel mode. Then, I'll install my test SSD, loaded with Windows, benchmarks, and plenty of games. And while we're here, if you're enjoying the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing so you don't miss the next one coming soon. After installing all the drivers and Windows updates, it's finally time to see what this workstation can actually do. Counter-Strike 2, minimum settings, and about 40 frames per second. Not exactly what I'd call playable. GTA 5 Enhanced doesn't even launch. Forza also refuses to start. Cyberpunk 2077 crashes during the benchmark. At that point, I thought, let's stop torturing this poor workstation and give it the upgrade it deserves. When it comes to removing old graphics drivers, I can honestly recommend Display Driver Uninstaller. I've tested hundreds of graphics cards over the years, and this little program has never let me down. Let's get rid of those old graphics drivers and prepare the system for a proper upgrade. Did exactly what it was supposed to do, so now it's time for a little bit of tuning. Since this is supposed to become a gaming workstation, I thought, why not throw some ultraviolet lighting inside? Yes, UV lighting, because why not? The best part It's powered directly from the motherboard's internal USB 2.0 header, gives us power as soon as the system boots. The RGB community may never recover from this astonishing technological breakthrough. And the result? I'd say it actually looks pretty cool. Speaking of the power supply, Dell included the original proprietary graphics cable. It converts Dell's custom connector into 2 standard 6-pin PCI Express connectors. To power my graphics card, I only had to buy a simple adapter, converting those 2 6-pin connectors into a single standard 8-pin PCI Express connector. When I was taking apart case for cleaning, I did notice one thing. Front panel isn't painted black, it's made from smoked translucent plastic, just like the top cover of a PlayStation 3.
A few inches later.
And now, it's finally time for the most important upgrade in this entire build. And speaking of that, likey, today's video is proudly sponsored by me. That's right. I bought a brand new Gigabyte Radeon RX 9060X T-Gaming OC Ice with 16 gigabytes of VRAM for the incredibly reasonable price of £457. My wallet is still recovering. It may not be the fastest graphics card on the market, but it's definitely one of the better options available today. I chose this card just even though I've spent most of my life using NVIDIA graphics cards, and my daily laptop is powered by an RTX 50 series GPU, so why did I choose the Radeon? The answer is actually pretty simple. Price. The Radeon RX 9060X T16. Gigabyte usually sells for around £400 to £430, while the GeForce RTX 5060 Ti 16 GB typically starts at around £430 and can easily climb to $580 depending on the model and manufacturer. That made the Radeon a much better value for my money. And just to be clear, I'm not comparing the cheapest dual fan models or the 8GB versions. I'm talking about proper triple fan cards with 16 gigabytes of video memory. And I don't know why, but white graphics cards just hit different. I'd happily pay a little extra for a white one, instead of buying the cheaper black version. But honestly, I absolutely love how this white card looks. At first glance, this is exactly what you'd expect from a premium Gigabyte Gaming OC card. A massive triple fan cooler, a full-length metal backplate, a solid heatsink with plenty of cooling surface, and a clean design that feels more functional than flashy. The card uses a single 8-pin PCIe power connector, which keeps power requirements reasonable while still leaving plenty of headroom for gaming. What really caught my attention is Gigabyte's WindForce cooler. The middle fan spins in the opposite direction to reduce turbulence and improve airflow through the heatsink. Overall, it feels like a very well-built graphics card, with a clear focus on cooling, low noise, and reliability, rather than unnecessary gimmicks. The only real downside, at least for me, is the display connectivity. You only get 3 video outputs, and one of them is HDMI. It certainly isn't a deal breaker, but I wouldn't mind having one more output. Now that we've taken a closer look at this beauty, it's finally time to install it. And I have to say, installing it inside this workstation couldn't be easier. There's an incredible amount of space in here. And one thing that's definitely worth mentioning is that this motherboard includes 2 full PCI Express 3.0 by 16 slots, which means you can actually run 2 full-size graphics cards without sacrificing bandwidth. Personally, I have something slightly different planned. In the future, I'd like to install an NVMe expansion card instead of a second graphics card. At this point, all that's left is connecting the graphics power cable. Some of you are probably wondering if this adapter is actually safe. The answer is, it depends. This isn't a cheap Molex adapter powering an RTX 5090. It's a quality 8-pin adapter connected to Dell's original graphics power cable, so I'm perfectly comfortable using it. And if you'd like to see thermal tests of the cable under full load, let me know. I might make a short about it. Before we move on to the gaming benchmarks, just a quick note. All of the tests will be done at 1080p, simply because I don't have a higher resolution monitor. Before somebody jumps into the comments asking, where's Cinebench? Let me explain. This is PCB gaming, not PCB working. So let's launch some games instead. And finally, it's benchmark time. Let's start with Counter-Strike 2, running on the low preset. This time, we're getting around 120 frames per second, which means the game is finally properly playable. The biggest limitation here is actually the processor. The graphics card is only sitting at around 70% utilization, so there's still plenty of performance left, waiting for a faster CPU. Let's move on to something a little more demanding. Cyberpunk 2077, running on the high preset with frame generation enabled. The game runs surprisingly well, averaging around 95 frames per second. Honestly, that's a really solid result. Next up, Grand Theft Auto 5 Enhanced. Once again, we're sitting around 100 frames per second. And just like Counter-Strike, the graphics card still has some headroom. Moving on to a much newer title. Dying Light, The Beast. High settings, mixed with ultra. And once again, we're seeing roughly 100 frames per second, which is more than enough for a smooth experience. And finally, for the very first time on this channel, Forza Horizon 6. Running on the high preset with frame generation enabled and render resolution set to quality. Unfortunately, this game turns out to be just a little too much for our 4-core Xeon. The benchmark finishes with a rather disappointing 37 frames per second, which brings us to the next step. It's finally time for a processor upgrade. Replacing the old CPU will be the Intel Xeon E5-1620 version 3, a processor featuring 14 cores and 28 threads. Its base clock is 2.3 GHz, boosting up to 2.8 GHz. Those clock speeds might not sound particularly impressive, but we've got a lot more cores. And that should make a noticeable difference, especially in games like Counter-Strike and Forza Horizon 6. Before applying fresh thermal paste, I just want to make sure that the current BIOS fully supports this processor. Right, perfect. The system still boots, which means it's time for some fresh Arctic MX7 thermal paste. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. That's way too much thermal paste. Maybe, nice. But it's worked for me for years, so I'm not changing it now. There is one thing I absolutely love about this workstation, and this might sound a little strange, but those airflow ducts, look, purpose-built. They give the entire machine a real high-performance workstation vibe. I honestly think they look awesome. All right, time for another round of benchmarks. And the difference is immediately obvious. Counter-Strike 2 is no longer sitting around 120 frames per second. Instead, we're seeing roughly 200 frames per second. Depending on the scene, it fluctuates between 170 and well over 200. That's an excellent result. especially when you remember that this processor cost me only about £10 just on eBay. Let's move on to Cyberpunk 2077. Depending on the location, we're now seeing anywhere between 90 and 170 frames per second with an average of roughly 140. Grand Theft Auto 5 Enhanced also receives a healthy performance boost. In the more GPU-heavy scenes, frame rates climb to around 170 up to 200 frames per second. Even in the CPU-heavy sections, we're still seeing around 130 to 140 frames per second. In Dying Light the Beast, we're now getting a very stable performance. Most of the time, frame rates sit closer to 120 than 100, which makes for a really smooth gaming experience. I have to admit, I was expecting a lot more visual artifacts with FSR. In reality, there were only a few minor issues. In GTA 5, the most noticeable one was the ghosting behind moving car. And in Forza Horizon 6, I only noticed some artifacting in the minimap. Other than that, the experience was surprisingly clean. And finally, it's time for the benchmark that completely destroyed our original 4-core Xeon, Forza Horizon 6. This time, the results are a completely different story. Average performance jumps to 76 frames per second, which is more than double what we achieved before. That's a huge improvement. And finally, makes the game properly enjoyable. Now, let's take a look at the comparison charts and sum everything up. Obviously, not everyone is going to pair this workstation with a brand new Radeon RX 9060 XT. If you're building one on a budget, I'd probably look for a Radeon RX 580, a GeForce GTX 1070, or if you can stretch the budget a little further, a Radeon RX 6600. All three are excellent choices for this platform. It really comes down to how much you want to spend. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Feel free to leave a tactical comment, or simply let me know what you think about this build. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.